Chapter 278. Ivatar Jahav 4. So, did you really sign a contract with Ifrit? Eugene asked. Call him by his full name, the Spirit King of Flames, Ifrit, Melkith demanded. Eugene repeated, I asked if you really managed to sign a contract with him? Melkith refused to answer. It's a secret. But it seems to me like you may have failed to sign the contract, no? Eugene said teasingly. If you really did manage to sign the contract, Lady Melkith, with your personality, there's no way you would stay silent about it, right? Melkith's eyes darkened gloomily at this teasing that Eugene delivered with a snicker. However, Eugene didn't stop at that and kept on talking. Even though you said that you had a feeling that you would definitely be able to sign a contract, in the end, you didn't manage to sign a contract with Ifrit, did you? Melkith responded coldly. I said to call him the Spirit King of Flames, Ifrit. Why do I have to say his name like that? Eugene asked. Finally losing patience, Melkith let out a loud roar. Because he might be listening to our conversation right now. She took out the firestone which she had carefully tucked between her breasts, and placed it on top of the table. Let me just be clear, I didn't fail to contract him, Melkith insisted. Failure does not exist for one such as I, Melkith el-Haya. It was just that, ever so slightly, it seems that our opinions of each other aren't quite coordinated. But that's just how contracts are. We need to keep fine-tuning the terms and adjusting to each other until we both finally reach a desired point where we then decide, fine, let's make a contract. Well, that just means you really did fail, Eugene said dismissively. Like I said, I didn't. I'm telling you, we're just currently reconciling a difference of opinions. As such, Eugene, be careful with the way you speak. Right now, this conversation is being overheard by the great and passionate Spirit King of Flames, Lord Ifrit. Lord Ifrit, this is how dearly I adore you, Melkith said as she held up the firestone with both hands and rubbed it against her cheek. Seeing this scene, Tempest loudly ground his teeth inside Eugene's head. Just how long are you going to keep straining your eyes like that? Eugene asked, tilting his chair back and looking to the side. From this angle he could see Cyan, who appeared to be furrowing his brow. I'm not doing anything, Cyan grunted. Eugene pointed out, even now you're still glaring daggers. Those bastards have been glancing at us since earlier, Cyan finally spat out as he suddenly unbuttoned his cuffs and started rolling up his sleeves. When Cyan clenched his fists, the tight muscles on his forearms twitched menacingly. And as if that wasn't enough, Cyan even unfastened the sword from his waist and leaned it against the table so that it could easily catch others' eyes. You're really overdoing it, Eugene sighed. The natives of Samar are known to kidnap foreigners to either eat them or sell them. I've heard that trading cities like this one in particular serve as hunting grounds for the natives, Cyan muttered cautiously. It had been 2 days since they had left the Lionheart mansion. Since there were no warp gates in Samar, they had arrived at the southern border of Kiel before moving directly across the border to the trade city located just at the entrance to the rainforest. Cyan's words weren't entirely wrong. Samar was a lawless zone where none of the laws of the continent applied, so there were many criminals who had fled here from other kingdoms. Such criminals would often commit crimes in collusion with the aggressive and violent natives, and the wealthy and thoughtless tourists who would recklessly venture all the way into this dangerous place were some of their favorite prey. Eugene scoffed. They wouldn't target us unless they've lost their minds. Eugene and his companions were sitting at an outdoor table at a street bar. Although he had made eye contact with a few of those passing them on the street, most immediately turned their gazes away from him and quickly scurried past. The same went for the guys who were watching their party from the shadows. People always unconsciously let out a specific type of aura. Although he wasn't wearing the formal clothes of the Lionheart clan, the aura emitted from Eugene was aggressive enough that no one else dared to make eye contact with him. In contrast, the atmosphere at their table was quite cozy. This is pretty delicious, Rhaenyra said with a big smile as she indulged in the exotic stir-fries that had been ladled onto their plates and served to them. You've got something on your cheek, Christina, sitting across from Rhaenyra, chided gently as she wiped Rhaenyra's cheek with a napkin. Mother, Rhaenyra unconsciously muttered. She had already been receiving this sort of care for several days now. On their first meeting, Rhaenyra had nearly been killed when a flail had been mercilessly swung at her, but ever since then, this blonde priest had been very kind and gentle to her. Rhaenyra sincerely wished that Christina could be her actual mother. When I talked to Lord Father Black Dragon, I can ask him to let me take that human as my nanny, Rhaenyra seriously thought to herself. From what she had overheard, the only one who would be taking on the challenge to slay the Black Dragon was Eugene Lionheart. Although Rhaenyra couldn't do anything to stop him from getting himself killed like that, she would at least be able to save the priest. Me too, Sir Eugene, something's on my cheek as well, Mare, who had been eating in the seat next to Rhaenyra, whined for help. Without any sign of annoyance, Eugene wiped Mare's face clean. Is that really a dragon? Cyan asked skeptically. Rhaenyra demanded, Call me the Dragon Duchess, you insignificant human. Is she really a dragon, one of the masters of all magic? Melkith muttered with an expression of disbelief. Now that they had accompanied him to Samar, Eugene had been forced to share some of the details of their other mission with Cyan and Melkith. He didn't tell them about how they had been involved in the fall of the Dragon Demon Castle and the eradication of Carabloom. Instead, Eugene just told them that he broke into the Dragon Demon Castle during a battle and kidnapped the Dragon Duchess. That was all he had to say. All my illusions about the dragons have been shattered, Cyan muttered as he shook his head. The reason Cyan was constantly nervous and continuously surveyed their surroundings wasn't just the lawless place that was Samar. Cyan had thought that all they were here for was to investigate the truth behind the black magic that was being prepared in the Samar rainforest. But now he had discovered that they were here for even more important matters. They were going to save the wise Sienna, but Cyan seemed to feel burdened by the weight of their purpose. Can't we interfere with the magic from here? Cyan asked agitatedly. Eugene shook his head. I feel like we'll need to go in deeper. As soon as they had arrived at the trade city, Eugene had attempted to use the draconic spell on Rhaenyra. However, it seemed like they couldn't yet reach the dimensional rift where Rhyzakia was located from here. Even after getting trapped within a dimensional rift, Rhyzakia had somehow managed to tie his existence to the land of the Samar rainforest. Seemingly abandoning the dignity of a dragon, he had fallen into an existence that was no different from a spirit of the land. Thanks to that, Rhyzakia hadn't just disappeared over the past 200 years and had managed to survive while within the dimensional rift. In order to reach the space where Rhyzakia was located, they needed to open the doorway by using Rhaenyra as the key, and the doorway was rooted somewhere deep within the rainforest. Or else, we would need to erase the entire rainforest, Eugene considered thoughtfully. This was, of course, impossible. Erasing the entirety of the Samar rainforest would mean wiping away the world tree in which Sienna was sealed and the entire Elven territory as well. They needed to kill Rhyzakia, then save Sienna. In order to accomplish both these tasks, they had no choice but to first open the dimensional doorway hidden deep within the rainforest. If only something like this wasn't going on, it wouldn't be that difficult to infiltrate the rainforest, Eugene thought with a frown as he scanned the outside of the bar. There had been a huge change in the atmosphere of the trade city since the last time they had come here. Eugene was very familiar with atmospheres like that. He couldn't help but get used to them after spending so long in them. The trade city was either embroiled in a war or preparing for one. The goods being traded were mostly war materials such as weapons, and tourists were rare. You could also see a few merchants of death and other hyenas who had been drawn to the scent of war. Even the natives could often be seen hiring mercenaries. But I've heard that the Fury Independence Army has withdrawn, Eugene recalled. It seems that Iris doesn't want to get involved in this war. The Fury Independence Army was a group of dark elves led by Iris. The last time Eugene had passed through, those knife ears were in the middle of setting down roots within this trade city. But now their leader Iris had been defeated in a territorial war against Morgia Bella and had fallen into the role of playing pirate. That said, this didn't mean that their ultimate goal had changed. Iris still hoped to raise her own races and eventually achieve the recognition of being crowned as the next Demon King. It seemed that rather than looking for some fun in this war, Iris had decided to retreat her forces early in order to avoid any losses to her already paltry numbers and focus on plundering the seas. He's here, Melkith said with a smile. She had spotted a man dressed in dark red robes, with his blonde hair tied back, coming this way. This was the Red Tower Master Lovelian Sophies. As he had immediately departed from Arath when he got their message, they had been waiting to meet him here today. It's been a long time, the approaching Lovelian said with a faint smile. Ivatar had decided to stay outside the city gates, so now that Lovelian, the last person they had been waiting for, had arrived, they did not need to keep sitting here any longer. After exchanging some casual greetings, Eugene and the others began walking down the street. Eugene cautioned Lovelian, "This is all a secret from the patriarch." "Yes, I know," Lovelian responded with a slight nod before glancing toward Cyan. Seeing them together like this, the contrast between the siblings was clear. Both at 21 years old, they might be the same age, but Eugene had enough composure that he could afford to appear calm. However, Cyan had had to calm his racing breaths several times since they had started walking. Though that's the normal reaction to all this, Lovelian thought as, unbeknownst to himself, he smiled wryly. He had watched over Cyan, Seal, and Eugene since their childhood. The twins from the main family were extraordinary enough to be rightfully called geniuses, but they were still nothing compared to Eugene. Wasn't that the case even now? In the depths of the rainforest, an unknown plot was being hatched. Countless natives were gathering to wage war. And finally, they were about to attempt the rescue of the wise Sienna, who had disappeared for over 200 years. Even Lovelian, who had seen many years, couldn't help but feel the pressure. It was understandable that Malkuth, who had only accompanied them on a whim, could still appear calm. However, Lovelian couldn't do the same. They first had to deal with his hated black magic, and if that was all there was to deal with, then Lovelian would have been able to draw upon his bloodthirst to keep his cool. But whenever he thought about the wise Sienna, whom he respected as his grandmaster, Lovelian's heart felt heavy and his mouth felt dry. How could Cyan, a 21-year-old young man, do any better? Moreover, there was also the fact that Cyan had come along due to his sense of duty as the Lionheart clan's next patriarch. The only one who could be feeling an even greater burden than Cyan would be Eugene. As the hero who had been recognized by the Holy Sword and the wise Sienna's successor, Eugene was also the one who would be forced to fight Raizakia within the dimensional rift alone. Lovelian wouldn't even be able to do anything to intervene in their fight. Even with all that, Eugene's face was still calm. Although this sense of incongruity was a feeling that Lovelian had gotten many times up until now, the sensation this time was particularly intense. Lovelian asked cautiously, "Are you all right, Sir Eugene?" Eugene started, "Huh? Why are you asking me that?" "It's just that you don't seem worried at all," Lovelian trailed off. "It only looks like that." "I'm actually extremely nervous," Eugene confessed. But it really didn't look like he was. Lovelian got a sudden suspicion. What if? Although it was an absurd idea, Lovelian was a wizard. He believed that there wasn't anything that was truly absurd in this world. From the moment that Eugene created his signature, he had become Lovelian's equal as a wizard. It didn't matter that they had differences in the types of magic they were and weren't able to cast. In a magic battle, as long as they both used their signatures, Lovelian would no longer be able to gain an advantage over Eugene. That alone was already impressive enough. But what if Eugene used everything in his power to fight? If so, Lovelian didn't have the confidence to beat Eugene. Yet this was still just a young 21-year-old man that they were talking about. But what if he was? Lovelian considered his previous suspicion once more as he gazed at Eugene's back. The back of the young man walking in front of him looked so reliable and experienced that it was hard to believe he was only 21. Perhaps Sir Eugene is. Lovelian's thoughts were suddenly cut off by Cyan's shrill screech. Eugene had suddenly struck Cyan, who was walking right next to him, with a low kick. Eugene lectured Cyan, "Relax that face of yours, you bastard. Then while you loosen up that expression, stretch out your shoulders as well. Why are you acting so stiff when you're the one who stubbornly insisted on following along?" Cyan protested. "Why on earth would you hit me?" "To get you to relax," Eugene replied with a shrug. Perhaps he was just overthinking things. Lovelian had a puzzled expression on his face as he tried to overlap the suspicion that had risen in his head with Eugene's current appearance. Deep down, Lovelian suspected that Eugene Lionheart had to be the reincarnation of the Great Vermouth. Yet when he saw Eugene like this, he felt that that couldn't be the case. The Great Vermouth, whose tales had been passed down through legends, just didn't seem to overlap with this image of Eugene Lionheart. Instead, his casual and smirking appearance more closely resembled that of stupid Hamel. But that would truly be impossible, Lovelian thought dismissively. For the Great Vermouth to be reincarnated as a descendant of his own bloodline would be hard to believe, but it still seemed somewhat plausible. However, how on earth could the stupid Hamel have been reincarnated as a Lionheart, a family to whom he had no connection whatsoever? The souls of the deceased were supposed to flow into the afterlife according to the natural laws of the world. Unless some lunatic were to go against the natural order of things and forcibly retrieve the soul of the stupid Hamel. Lovelian gave it some more thought, but it still seemed absolutely ridiculous. Lovelian tried hard to ignore the eerie shivers running down his back. Eugene turned and asked, "Has there been any further news regarding Balzac Ludbeth?" Lovelina belatedly responded, No, there hasn't been any news. He simply followed procedure and submitted a leave of absence 15 days ago before leaving the Black Tower of Magic. And you don't know where he went, right? Eugene confirmed. We can be sure that he did leave Arath. But honestly speaking, I don't think it's Balzac who devised this scheme. While I do agree with you that Balzac is a suspicious individual, if he were to come up with a scheme like this, he wouldn't be acting so blatantly as he is, Lovelian surmised. That does make sense. For some reason, I get the image of Balzac conducting human experimentation in his secret, undisclosed laboratory somewhere, Melkith said with a chuckle. How frustrating. Christina, go and give Hamel a pat on the butt, Anise suddenly instructed. Christina gave a startled, huh. When it was just the two of us traveling with Hamel, I was able to come out as I pleased. But since our party has grown, I'm no longer able to come out freely, Anise explained. Since when did you care about something like that? Christina asked. It's all right for you to come out if you want to, sister. As long as you're careful to not call Sir Eugene Hamel, that is. Anise refused. No, I won't come out. If there's a situation where I have to step in, I'll have no choice but to come out. Yet if at all possible, I plan to leave it up to you this time. Anise's words were sincere. Just like how Eugene had caught the scent of war, Anise had also detected the smell of the battlefield. Anise was familiar with war. However, Christina was still a stranger to war. You'll have to see a lot of corpses in this forest. You'll be learning how brutal war is, what you, as a single cleric, can do on the battlefield, and how small of an existence you really are when facing the ruthlessness of war, Anise warned. Christina remained silent. I hope you won't get broken by the first war you see. Instead, I hope it will become an experience that will help you grow. Christina, my immediate advice for you is, get rid of your arrogant desire to save everyone. Yes, sister, Christina responded inside her head as she kept staring at Eugene's back. Christina had vowed that she would follow him. She had decided that she would always see the same things that Eugene saw. It wasn't the same as a saint's duty to follow the hero. It was Christina Rogerus who had decided to follow Eugene Lionheart. When she recalled these memories, Christina's face seemed to heat up a little. While fanning her hands to cool down her flushed face, Christina hastened her steps. If at all possible, I wish I could look a little more human, Hector muttered with a twisted expression. It was a valid complaint. Even in the most polite terms, Hector's current appearance couldn't be described as anything close to human. The number of Hector's arms that should have stopped at 2 had been increased to 6, and of those added arms, 2 seemed to have once belonged to some kind of vicious monster. The lower half of his body also had monster legs instead of human legs. In order to balance his increased number of arms, Hector's torso had to become larger and thicker, and on top of all that, the face was also ugly. A voice asked, "Does your body not feel right?" "I've gotten somewhat used to it. I just don't like the way it looks," Hector complained. "Don't be too dissatisfied. After all, I created it to fit the shape of your soul, so it is the ideal body for you," the voice revealed. Hector Lionheart's body had died and disintegrated. Right at that moment, Hector's soul had been summoned by the black wizard he was contracted to, Edmund Codrith. It had already been a year since that had happened. The shape of his soul, huh? Hector clicked his tongue in disappointment as he glared down at his body. He had only recently obtained this body after being forced to exist solely as a soul. This hideous body may have given up all resemblance to humanity, but it was all the stronger for it, and he could also move easily in it. At first, it had been awkward and strange to learn how to handle having 6 arms, but now he had gotten completely used to it. Hector lightly shook his 6 arms around as he turned to look at their surroundings. He was currently within a spacious arena, but there were no opponents to be seen. Edmund was the only one sitting in the spectator stands. Usually, this was where the Coachella tribe's slaves were forced to kill each other in order to survive. Perhaps because this was a tribe whose culture was based on a hierarchy of cruelty, there were traces of that cruelty everywhere. Each grain of soil gave off the smell of blood. A fence made up of human bones had been erected in front of the walls of the arena. The bodies of those who had died here yesterday were hanging from the ends of long skewers that had been erected like decorations. Hector didn't really feel any revulsion to this. His calm reaction to everything actually surprised even himself. Ugh! A raspy voice suddenly broke the silence. A man who had just entered the spectator stands scowled down at Hector and said, "You really do look awful. It makes me want to kill you." Edmund interjected, "I thought I told you the time beforehand, so just where did you go?" "Out for a walk," the man said curtly. Though his hands may have been wiped clean, there was a strong scent of blood wafting from the man. Edmund gave a wry smile and shrugged his shoulders. "If you wanted to take a walk, it can't be helped. Thank you for coming regardless." "So what now? Is it okay if I kill that thing?" the man asked, raising one finger and pointing at Hector. "No, you can't kill him," Edmund denied. "I will still need to test the performance and stress limits of that body afterward. But you wouldn't go so far as to call me for something like this, right? Don't make such an obvious excuse. You just want to take a look at my skills," the man said with a sneer. "Of course, that is one of my reasons for calling you here," Edmund readily admitted. "I don't really want to play along. If it wasn't for my master's request, I would kill you too," the man spat out, his lips twisting into a scowl, but Edmund just grinned in response. "Please understand my feelings," Edmund politely requested. "Isn't it only natural that I would want to see the famed skills of the stupid Ham?" Before Edmund had even finished speaking, the man, no, Hamel, had closed the distance in an instant and thrust his sword toward Edmund's throat. "Don't call me that," the man hissed, his eyes glinting dully. The blade was touching his Adam's apple, but Edmund's complexion was still as calm as ever. "I know you've provided a lot of help in my creation. However, that doesn't mean you're my master. Do you get what I'm saying? If not, let me spell it out for you." "Watch your mouth," the man growled. Edmund shrugged his shoulders slightly and nodded. "Understood, I'll be more careful." The man snorted and lowered his sword. He then jumped down in front of Hector, who was still standing in the arena, and threw the sword he was holding behind him. "Your sword?" Hector said questioningly. "Do you think I'll need to use a sword to deal with a bastard like you?" the man sneered. Without making any further response, Hector took up a stance. The man chuckled as he scanned Hector, who was now holding a sword in each of his 6 hands, from head to toe, and said, "This reminds me of the old days." Chapter 279. Ivatar Jahov 5. One of the great heroes from 300 years ago, Hamel Dynas. Among the demon folk of Helmuth, those high-ranking demons who had lived through that era called him Hamel the Exterminator. However, instead of the nickname Hamel the Exterminator, Edmund, who wasn't a demon folk, was more familiar with the nickname the Stupid Hamel. As I'd expected, Edmund thought as he stood with his hands behind his back and looked down into the arena. This wasn't really the Stupid Hamel himself. Hamel's tomb had been discovered in the desert by Amelia Merwin. Excavating that site, she found a corpse that hadn't rotted even after hundreds of years and made it into a death knight. "She's still the same," Edmund judged. Amelia Merwin had a particular stubborn tendency. Perhaps because she herself was just such an existence, Amelia was obsessed with aberrant existences. The Inquisitor from the Malficarum she was currently toying with was just her latest obsession. Outwardly, the Inquisitor possessed a human appearance, but her body was actually a chimera that had been cultivated using a vampire as its base. Amelia had also told him that the soul hadn't even originally been born into that body but was instead a soul that had been inserted into it during the cultivation process. Edmund had also heard about this Death Knight from a while back. After being lucky enough to dig up the perfect material with which to make a Death Knight, Amelia had made several attempts at using it. At first, she had even infused it with the soul of a beast folk, which was more aggressive than a human's and possessed stronger fighting instincts. But the rejection from using a soul of a completely different race from the body had proven too strong, so from then on she began using a lycanthrope's soul. Lycanthropes were a species that had mutated from humans, and thanks to that she was able to get some decent results. Amelia herself wasn't really satisfied with the ultimate outcome, but she had still grown attached to it over the years and called it her pet. Yet after all that, it had been ruined. Eugene Lionheart, who had suddenly barged into the tomb, destroyed Amelia's cherished Death Knight. During the process, the soul was destroyed, but fortunately Hamel's corpse remained intact. Amelia decided to change her methods. In the process of doing so, Edmund, a fellow member of the so-called 3 Mages of Incarceration, and the current staff of incarceration provided her with a lot of help. If Amelia could just give up on her stubborn insistence, she could have infused the corpse with a human soul that possessed a high level of conformity with the body. If she felt like her Death Knight skills were lacking, she could have just killed one of the most skilled knights on the continent and stolen their soul. However, Amelia hadn't wanted to use such a method. She still clung to the idea of creating an aberrant, twisted existence, one that the world would never accept. A being that should never have been born. After many experiments and failed attempts, Amelia finally created the Death Knight below. She used a demonic beast that could reflect and imitate its prey's appearance, then combined that with the soul of a doppelganger. By doing so, the perfectly preserved, decomposing brain of Hamel's corpse was copied onto the doppelganger's soul. So this thing wasn't really the stupid Hamel, the great hero from 300 years ago. Strictly speaking, it was just a lunatic that believed it was Hamel. However, this Death Knight actually deserved to call itself Hamel. Possessing Hamel's body, it was able to copy all of Hamel's own experiences and memories. Of course, for the sake of complete obedience, Hamel's desire for vengeance against all demon folk had been pruned. By inscribing new memories in a way that was no different from forceful brainwashing, Amelia even made the Death Knight accept her as its master wholeheartedly. That was how this Death Knight had been created. A puppet warrior who was loyal to its master, Amelia Merwin, and followed her every command, having lost the original's unrelenting desire to kill all demon folks. "Shall I continue?" the Death Knight asked, turning his head to look up at Edmund. It was only wearing a simple set of armor. Because it had copied its body's former habits, the Death Knight had a dislike of heavy and cumbersome armor. As for its weapons, rather than having any special set of weapons, it preferred weapons that it didn't have to worry about keeping intact and having a variety of weapons on hand. This variety of weapons available to the Death Knight included its own bare hands. It had taken less than 10 minutes for the Death Knight to completely dismantle Hector's monstrous body. Although Hector's body, which had been endowed with a powerful regenerative ability, had continued to regenerate even after pieces were plucked off, torn apart and crushed, each time Hector healed himself, the Death Knight would just laugh happily and repeat its previous efforts of destroying and dismantling his opponent. "You've done enough," Edmund responded with a smile. Hector was strewn across the ground, unable to regenerate any longer, but that wasn't anything to worry about. His soul hadn't been damaged. His mind was just slightly frayed from the repeated bouts of pain and shock. If the damage was just that much, Edmund could easily fix it with just one lift of his finger. Still, since Hector was a subordinate he quite valued, he should at least say something for form's sake. "I think you may have been a bit excessive," Edmund added. At this, the Death Knight let out a snort and crushed Hector's head, which it had ripped from his body beneath its foot. The Death Knight gave a feeble excuse. "I tried to swat him around lightly, but before I knew it my hands grew a bit too heavy. It can't be helped. This bastard, he's a Lionheart, isn't he?" "That's right," Edmund nodded. "Although he's not from the main line. As long as even one drop of blood from that son of a bitch, vermouth, flowed through his veins, then I have a problem with him," the Death Knight sneered. "You died after being betrayed by your comrades. In your last moments, Vermouth's sword pierced your heart. Your colleagues all betrayed you. After 300 years have passed, you who once fought against the Demon Kings, and your death are now being treated as a joke. No one knows about your comrades' ugly betrayal of you or the fact that they didn't even fight the Demon King of Incarceration. Instead, your comrades struck a deal with the Demon King of Incarceration for their own safety. The Demon King of Incarceration took pity on you and preserved your body and soul. Then your new existence was bestowed upon you by Amelia Merwin. These were the memories that Amelia had implanted. The Death Knight, who believed himself to be Hamel, had not the slightest doubt about his memories. He was grateful to the Demon King and also to his master, Amelia Merwin. He also hated his former comrades and held an especially strong grudge against the Lionhearts. "If it weren't for the fact that you betrayed your family, I would have ended you completely," the Death Knight whispered to Hector, who was writhing on the ground as he slowly regenerated. Brushing off his blood-soaked hands, the Death Knight climbed back into the stands. "It's aggravating to have one such as you who doubt my skills, but since you're a friend of my master I've put up with it for now. But there is no next time. Don't bother to call me if there isn't a battle," the Death Knight warned. "I'll be careful to do so," Edmund promised. "The world really has gotten so much more peaceful." To think that a petty black wizard like you would dare to snicker to himself in front of me. The Death Knight snorted as he walked past Edmund. Edmund also had to swallow his laughter as he watched the Death Knight leave. Although that might just have been how it was created, honestly speaking, it was hard for Edmund to hold back a laugh whenever it said such things. With its twisted memories and one-sided hatred, even though it wasn't Hamel himself, it still believed it was Hamel. It talked as if it still held a hatred for black wizards and demon folks, but the Death Knight didn't really possess those sorts of feelings. Even so, the Death Knight still ranted about his hatred for black wizards and demon folks. The Death Knight was faithfully acting according to its own copied memories. Worthy of Amelia's love, Edmund mumbled. Such an incongruity was exactly the kind of thing that Amelia stubbornly insisted on clinging to. Could it be that even a terrifying witch like her couldn't resist her own innate nature? Edmund snickered to himself as he shook a finger. Hector's body, which had been torn to pieces and scattered, melted into liquid all at once. Then the liquid all gathered together before reforming back into an intact figure. How was it? Edmund asked with a wide smile. As Hector stood there stiffly, the light slowly returned to his eyes. Eventually Hector asked, "Can you really control that thing?" There wasn't any pain remaining in his body. However, just recalling what had happened was enough to make Hector tremble in fear. That thing was demonic. No other words came to mind to describe that Death Knight. Hector was someone who had confidence in his skills. In the first place, he had once been evaluated as the most talented individual in all of the Lionheart's collateral lines. In Roer, where he trained as a knight, he had been appointed as an honorary Knight of the White Fangs, who were indispensable whenever it came to discussing the strongest knightly orders on the continent. That was how his skills had been evaluated in his previous life. Yet Hector hadn't ever revealed his true talent. And now he had even been given a body that was overwhelmingly superior and stronger than any humans, but he was still no match for the Death Knight. No matter what methods Hector used to attack, they were blocked with a sneer and then ruthlessly trampled upon. "It's very well made, isn't it?" Edmund said with a laugh. "It has perfectly reproduced the fighting ability of the great hero, the stupid Hamel. Now that his dead body has been made into a Death Knight, it should even be incomparably stronger than when he was alive. In exchange for not being able to use any mana, it now has free use of dark power. But is that really it? What makes that Death Knight especially exceptional is that it still has a lot of room for growth. That's why I'm asking, are you really able to control that?" Hector repeated his doubts. Edmund sneered. "Since it's me you're asking, the answer to that seems so obvious that I didn't even bother replying. I'm now certain that you really don't know anything about magic. You're asking if I can control him? Of course I can. In the end, that thing is just a Death Knight, and such a being can never go against the master and servant contract. However, Sir Edmund, the owner of that Death Knight, isn't you but Amelia Merwin, right?" Hector brought up cautiously. The ritual being prepared in the rainforest was an important ritual that had to succeed, not just for Edmund's sake but for Hector's as well. Hector had become fascinated with the current staff of incarceration's secret desire. He may have already died as a human, but if it was for the sake of Edmund's ambition, Hector was so determined to guarantee its success that he was even prepared to die a few more times. But there were too many uncertainties about the success of this ritual. For example, the Black Dragon's sinister intent that had polluted the entire land within the rainforest. Edmund was confident that he would actually be able to make use of it and keep it under control, but Hector, who was ignorant of magic, had difficulties sympathizing with his confidence. And was that all? It was also hard to believe that the dubious dungeon master of the desert was being transparent in her cooperation with Edmund. "Amelia and I are not enemies," Edmund said reassuringly as he stroked his beard and laughed. "Instead, we're actually in a position to cooperate with each other for the sake of our respective desires. Listen carefully, Hector. For a magician, their secret desire is an ideal that must be achieved, even if it means putting their entire life's work into fulfilling it. Still, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that requires them to compete with other wizards for it. Is that the case?" Hector said with a frown. "After all, the direction that our respective desires take us isn't necessarily the same. That's why Amelia and I are able to cooperate so amicably. After fulfilling my secret desire with Amelia's help, I have made a promise to help Amelia with fulfilling hers," Edmund revealed. He and Amelia had known each other for a very long time. The two were well aware of how vastly different the aims of their respective desires were. There was no reason for either of them to betray the other when it came to this matter. I helped her in the creation of that Death Knight, Edmund added. I've only borrowed it temporarily to reinforce our forces here. Once everything is over, that Death Knight will be returned to Amelia once more. Also, when Amelia wishes for it, I will offer her my help. Eventually, Hector said, I know what your secret desire is. However, I don't know what Amelia Merwin's secret desire is. Edmund replied, her secret desire is quite complex, but, to put it simply, Amelia wants strength. Strength. Hector repeated in confusion. Even if Edmund was trying to abbreviate his explanation, wasn't that a bit too short? As such, Hector couldn't understand what Edmund meant by those words. In the first place, it was questionable that a wizard on the same level as Amelia Merwin would desire even more strength. A great amount of strength, Edmund clarified with a smile as he stood up. As I'm not her, it would be impolite for me to elaborate any further on the nature of her secret desire. However, you should also be able to see why we are working together. Once everything in this forest is completed, I will become a helper who can provide the great strength that Amelia requires. Can you really succeed? Hector asked with a worried expression. Edmund's smile deepened and his voice grew more forceful. Of course. All variables have been taken into account. Uad Lionheart had obtained a spell from the remnants of the Demon Kings. It could reconstruct the soul and create a new body. Uad had almost succeeded in becoming a being comparable to a Demon King by taking in the remnants of the Demon Kings and transcending into a Spirit King of Darkness. However, he had failed. Uad himself was the biggest variable. It was all because a snot-nosed brat like him had gotten his hands on far more power than he could control. The evil intent of the Demon Kings that had decayed into those remnants had desired the blood and soul of the Lionheart clan's main line as a sacrifice due to their hatred for the hero Vermouth. Yes, something like that was all that they needed. If you thought about it differently, it actually would be surprising if Uad could have completed the transformation of the remnants of the Demon Kings and become a new Demon King with just that number of sacrifices. To a certain extent, it was because Uad had had the remnants of the Demon Kings working with him. However, Edmund had neither a spirit of darkness nor any remnant of the Demon Kings. Even so, Edmund would not fail. He knew the function of the spell. He had repurposed and supplemented the entire ritual. The large scale of the spell itself was an indication of just how special Edmund's plans for it were. A large number of sacrifices would be required, but even if the last remaining seeds of the natives in this forest were to dry up, the eyes of the continent wouldn't be drawn to this place immediately. What great luck! Edmund had celebrated when he copied the spell from Hector's memory. While feeling like he had been blessed by the god that he didn't even believe in, Edmund was delighted by the results of that night. This was a spell that Edmund himself hadn't been able to complete even after decades of research spent pursuing it. He never thought that he would actually be able to receive assistance from the remnants of the Demon Kings who had died 300 years ago. His luck didn't stop there. Edmund had always wondered where the black dragon Raizakia, one of the three dukes, a powerful existence of such caliber, could have disappeared to. He would never have thought that all traces of Raizakia's presence would have been embedded into this land. It was also a huge turn of luck that the grave of that stupid lizard happened to be here, Edmund thought with satisfaction. Raizakia's evil intent had thoroughly polluted this land. In actuality, it seemed that instead of dying, Raizakia was wandering around in a dimensional rift somewhere, but happily that just made it easier for Edmund to make use of these circumstances. When the land of the rainforest was used as the base for his spell, it would draw in Raizakia's dark power as well as the power of the ley lines below. Countless souls would also be offered as sacrifices, and Edmund had become the staff of incarceration due to being valued for his magical power. He could also draw on the dark power stored within Vladimir, which had been crafted using a whole dragon heart. On top of that, he would even be drawing on the dark power of Raizakia, an ancient dragon turned demon dragon. There was no way he could fail with all these on his side. That said, Edmund wasn't going to rush anything. For the sake of perfect success, human bone towers were still being built throughout the rainforest even now to serve as catalysts for the ritual. They would create streams of blood with the ability to bind souls that would flow through the whole forest. Theoretically, I'll even be able to absorb the power of the World Tree and make it my own, Edmund thought greedily. If Yuad's ritual had succeeded, he could have become a demon king, but it still would have been pretty close. For Yuad to actually become a demon king, it would have required the best-case scenario. Once this ritual was successful, Edmund would be reborn as a being even greater than a demon king. He would obtain the power of a true greater demon king, not one of the lower-ranking demon kings. Edmund would abandon his existence as a weak, mediocre and grossly overpopulated human being and become a greater demon king, one that was completely in tune with its nature. He had no regrets about leaving behind his life as a human. Should he be reborn as a greater demon king or remain a human? Was there even a need to consider the question? Edmund was confident in his success and he had the ability to make it happen. "If it's me, then I can surely do it," Edmund muttered with a self-assured smile. This was a declaration of his confidence. Hector quietly followed behind Edmund, keeping his head bowed. "This will change everything," Hector silently thought to himself. He would no longer be forced to live the life of a collateral bloodline whose abilities would never receive the full recognition they deserved. Hector had never been one to rest on his laurels, but he hadn't had the ability needed to overturn the Lionhearts, an immense and prestigious clan of warriors, so he had restrained himself. Even though he was praised as the best among all the collateral bloodlines, his heart had always felt empty. No matter how much acknowledgement he received, Hector felt that, in the end, he was just a member of a collateral bloodline. Someone who would never be in a position to learn the white flame formula that their great ancestor had passed down. While he was wandering around with this aching hole in his heart, Hector was contacted by Edmund. Edmund had recognized Hector's ability and had shown him a future that he would never be able to achieve by himself. Edmund told Hector that if he couldn't receive the recognition he craved from his clan, he should just abandon them. Instead of the Lionhearts of the continent, Hector could proudly erect a new Lionheart clan in Helmuth. The history of the Lionheart clan, which was over 300 years old, would become insignificant tales in the era of the new Demon King. Even as these two were dreaming up pictures of their future, full of confidence, battles were taking place all throughout the forest. Warriors of the Coachella tribe who were wearing masks made from human skin were raiding the lesser tribes. Whenever these raiding parties had too many hostages to bring back to the tribe, they reduced the number of their prisoners with impromptu massacres. These warriors followed the practices that Edmund had thoroughly trained in them. They would cut the hostages' chests open with black magic daggers that they had been given and pull out the hearts while their victims were still alive. Then, without needing anyone to draw the blood, the dagger would guide the blood from the sacrifices and use the harvested blood as another cog of the ritual. The blood would seep down into the soil. Gathering deep underground, the blood would start flowing like an underground water vein. After that, the warriors would chop up the corpses whose souls had been stripped from them, dig out the bones and use them to build a tower. "As I thought," a man muttered as he crouched down on a site where such a massacre had taken place. In a village that was overflowing with blood, the man wearing a hooded robe stood up. He approached the tall human bone tower that had been erected at the center of the village and examined it while rubbing his chin. "I've got a good idea of how you reinterpreted the spell. Edmund, as your friend, I can't help but admire your sense of magic," the man distractedly complimented. It was Balzac Ludbeth. He knew what the purpose of these human bone towers was. These towers weren't just totems that the natives from the Coachella tribe had constructed out of cruelty. These human bone towers would connect to the rivers of blood flowing underground and guide them to flow in the right direction. "This is a spell that I would never dare to think of, let alone actually attempt," Balzac admitted to himself with a wry smile. Although they might be called by the shared title of the three mages of incarceration, it was Edmund Kodrith who possessed the greatest ability as a wizard. That was why Edmund had been named the Staff of Incarceration and had been bestowed with Vladimir. Balzac was aware that he fell far short of Edmund as a wizard. He had managed to reconfirm that just now. In the first place, as a black wizard, Balzac Ludbeth didn't have any particular advantage or strength when compared to Amelia and Edmund. Nevertheless, the Demon King of Incarceration had still signed a contract with Balzac. In other words, Balzac had to have a talent that was worthy of catching the great Demon King's eyes. Balzac himself was well aware of what this talent was. He had been aware of it for a long time now, from back when he was still a member of the Blue Tower of Magic. Balzac Ludbeth was good at deception. Chapter 280. Ivatar Jahav 6. A few years ago, when Christina and Eugene crossed the Samar rainforest by themselves, Eugene had many things that he needed to be cautious of. At that time, their purpose had been to search for Sienna, who had gone into seclusion, by investigating the elven territory. Along the way they had even managed to discover a village of wandering elves. In order to avoid any unnecessary disputes, they had circled around any of the native tribes, and it had also taken them a long time to search here and there. This time, however, there wasn't any need for all that caution. The one leading the way for them was Ivatar, who was familiar with the paths leading through this incredibly vast forest. Though rather than being familiar with the paths, it would be more accurate to say that the forest itself was opening up a path for Ivatar. Ivatar was simply walking forward, but the densely packed trees would move their trunks aside as if they were alive and open a new path for him. The rough, muddy ground that was hard to walk on would also become flat and hard as soon as Ivatar raised his foot above it. Not only that, but the ground itself pulled his feet forward and the wind pushed against his back. This is the blessing of the forest that is passed down through the chieftains of the Zoran tribe, Ivatar explained. The natives of Samar were loved by the forest and its primal spirits. Yet among all the signs of affection the forest showed to the natives, its blessing was the most blatant and strongest expression of its love. It was a power that could be described as the ancestor of all spirit magic and had been passed down since time immemorial. Ivatar hadn't yet been ready to inherit this power when they first met a few years ago, but as the situation in this forest became increasingly unstable and Ivatar came of age, the divine blessing had been passed down to him. This time there was no need for their party to circle around the other tribes. The natives were extremely sensitive to any violations of their tribe's territories, but Ivatar was able to simply lead them straight through the other tribes' lands without paying any attention to all that. This was because the Zorans were one of the largest tribes in the forest, and Ivatar had already been confirmed as the next chieftain of the tribe after participating in a ceremonial duel. Lovelion's summoned creatures were also of great help. The horses he summoned were able to move swiftly without slowing down, even in the complex terrain of this forest. Thanks to that, in the mere week since they had left the trade city, their party had already been able to arrive at the territory of the Zoran tribe that lay deep within the forest. Among all the tribes that Eugene had seen in this forest, the Zoran tribe held the largest territory. This was partly thanks to the fact that the rainforest itself was so vast, but this tribe's territory was indeed larger than most noble territories Eugene had seen. After entering the outskirts of the tribe's territory, they walked for another day and a half. Even in the outskirts there were already warriors standing guard, and after passing through dozens of villages, they were finally close to the capital city of the Zoran tribe. Sir Eugene, Mare, who was riding one of the summoned beasts, turned to look back at Eugene with a worried expression on her face. She keeps acting weird. Rhaimira was riding in front of Mare on the same saddle. Even though Mare kept blatantly bullying Rhaimira, perhaps because they had so many things in common, they kept getting closer to each other by the day. While they usually followed a pattern where Rhaimira would arrogantly say something that revealed how ignorant she was of the world, only for Mare to poke holes in her pride, they actually got along quite well and had even ridden on the same summoned beast the whole time that the party traveled through the forest. Rhaimira immediately tried to reply, "This lady is fine," but her voice didn't have its usual strength. Eugene stared at Rhaimira's face, which had paled drastically. Her condition had started to turn strange from the previous night. While she was sleeping, Rhaimira had suddenly woken up with a scream, and after that she wasn't able to resume her calm rest and kept suffering from nightmares. 1. Even after waking up she couldn't muster the strength needed to take a drink of water properly, let alone eat, and her body kept shivering while letting out so much cold sweat it was as if she had been caught in the rain. That was still the case even now. Rhaimira was sitting with her head resting against Mare's chest as Mare gently supported her shoulders. Rhaimira's lips, which she kept chewing, weren't split open, but the teeth marks left on them were deep and swollen red. Her bangs were also drenched in sweat and hanging limply down her forehead. Rhaimira tried to make an excuse. "This lady, ever since this lady was born I have never left my palace. That means I was like a flower that had grown inside a greenhouse. As such, for one such as this lady to have left my villa and trekked across this hot and sticky forest, it is like I am being subjected to severe torture. So it is only natural for my body to be in such a poor state." "A dragon like you?" Eugene pointed out skeptically. "This lady doesn't see this as an issue that has anything to do with whether or not I am a dragon," Rhaimira sniffed. This is not a physical issue, it is a mental one. She wasn't entirely wrong. Christina and Anise were also among the members of the party. When Rhaimyra's condition had turned strange last night, the two had immediately checked her status. But Rhaimyra's abnormality seemed to have nothing to do with her body. Eugene sighed. Well, it's not like I don't have any idea what is causing this. Rhaimyra was startled. What is it? Your father is watching you, Eugene revealed with a smirk. If he had to come up with a reason for Rhaimyra's condition to suddenly turn strange, then that was the only reason he could think of. After entering the rainforest, Eugene kept periodically checking with the draconic spell. As he had initially thought, he concluded that it would be impossible to open a doorway to Rhyzakia from the outskirts of the forest. From the moment he was banished to an external dimension, even someone like Rhyzakia couldn't help but become desperate. Out of a tenacious desire to save his life and someday return to this world, Rhyzakia had somehow tied his own existence to the rainforest. Eugene had confirmed that the deeper they went into the forest, the stronger the connection that was detected, but it seemed that they would still have to go all the way to the center of the forest in order to open the doorway. As they got closer, close enough to check Rhyzakia's current condition from this side of the dimensional wall, that tenacious black dragon should also be able to extend his senses towards them from the other direction. Especially since they had brought Rhaimyra with them. The ruby embedded in her forehead was once part of Rhyzakia's dragon heart. Eugene prodded. If it's a psychological factor that is causing these abnormalities in your condition, you must have a vague sense of why that is, right? Rhaimyra whimpered. Ooh. Eugene kept pressing. When I asked you yesterday, didn't you say you just had a bad dream? But was that really all that it was? Do you really not remember what you saw in your dream? Rhaimyra's eyes shook with anxiety. Eugene's words were correct. Although Rhaimyra had said that she didn't remember, in fact she could vaguely recall the contents of her dream. Rhaimyra thought back to that dark gloom. It had been so dark that she couldn't even see her own body, and the darkness she was in had a sticky and unpleasant quality to it. She had thought that she was just standing there blankly, all by herself, but that wasn't the case. Something had been staring at Rhaimyra from the other side of that dark space. She had tried to escape due to instinctive misgiving and fear, but in Rhaimyra's dream, it had been impossible for her to escape. Your existence is all to serve me. Rhaimyra heard these words in the voice of the black dragon, her own father, a voice that had been deeply engraved into her memories. The darkness that slowly encroached, the darkness that had already engulfed Rhaimyra in the first place, grew increasingly heavier with an added sense of hostility and greed. At that moment, the darkness around her seemed to have changed. This change wasn't something that she had ever experienced in her life, so Rhaimyra couldn't really tell what that feeling had been. Nevertheless, this had led Rhaimyra to understand what her current situation in the dream had been. Rhaimyra was actually trapped in the mouth of something. She was still alive and in good condition, but she had somehow entered the mouth of a gigantic creature, and she was now sitting on its frigid tongue. The mouth's sharp fangs didn't chew her up, nor did the mouth try to swallow her. Yet instead of reassuring her, this filled Rhaimyra with even greater fear. She was about to be swallowed alive in just a single gulp. Heek, Rhaimyra squeaked. She really didn't want to recall that nightmare. After waking up once, Rhaimyra had tried to go back to sleep. That nightmare hadn't repeated itself. Instead, she had nightmares that left her feeling even worse and had worn out her consciousness. From a place outside of this world, someone was glaring at Rhaimyra. Although he wasn't able to reach out to her directly, it felt like her soul was getting pulled to him from the touch of his gaze alone. Mare felt sorry for the trembling and shaking Rhaimyra. As such, she gently reached out and patted the crown of Rhaimyra's head. At some point, Christina had also approached Rhaimyra while mounted on her own summoned beast. As Christina gently rubbed the back of Rhaimyra's hands and Mare patted the top of her head, Rhaimyra's trembling gradually eased. I know what's going on, Rhaimyra sobbed once she had reopened her eyes and started glaring at Eugene. You wicked human. You're definitely the one who's invading this lady's head. Eugene raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about now? There's no way that the nightmare I saw can be anything but a lie, Rhaimyra insisted. The only one who would benefit from showing me such a dream is you, Eugene Lionheart. Rhaimyra's words weren't just spouted at random. What reason would the black dragon have for swallowing his daughter whole? So it must be that this sinister hero had an evil plan to create a rift between her and her father, the Black Dragon. Seeing Eugene's fists begin to tremble, Lovelian and Christina quickly chimed in. Sir Eugene, please hold it in. You have to hold on to your temper. Anise disagreed. Why should he hold back? Even if she's right after saying such unpleasant things about you, you should still give her a taste of discipline. Melkith and Cyan also gave their different opinions. After all, isn't it rare to get the opportunity to smack a dragon on its head? If I behaved like that, would you hold back? Bam. Before Eugene could even step forward to do so, Mare had struck Rhaenyra on top of her head. We've arrived, Ivatar announced. This was the capital of the Zoran tribe, a city that had been built within the forest. Even from this distance, the temple constructed from piled-up stones could be seen. It was a temple dedicated to the god of the land, the dominant religion in Samar. Their pyramid-shaped temple was the largest and tallest structure in their capital. The other buildings were all low, square, and monotonous, much like those homes they had seen on their way here. The capital of the Zoran tribe was huge. Of course, it couldn't compare to Kiel's capital, but it was at least bigger than Eugene's hometown of Jadal. Eugene sighed. I've only just now realized, but my hometown really is out in the country. Are you able to admit that now? Cyan asked as he turned back to look at Eugene with an aggrieved expression. Even though you insisted that it wasn't so when we were young, your body truly did smell like cow dung. When even a city like this that's located inside of a forest doesn't give off the smell of cow dung like you did. Be quiet before I shove your face into a pile of dung, Eugene threatened. Cyan was well aware that this wasn't just a verbal threat on Eugene's part. He quietly kept his mouth shut as he stared at the capital's walls with narrowed eyes. The mood feels strange, Cyan observed. It wasn't a very welcoming atmosphere. The gates were closed and the vigilance of the guards on the walls was strong. The warriors guarding the walls, who had even put on their war paint, were glaring down at them with fierce eyes. Are you going to make a move? Eugene asked as he looked at Ivatar, who was standing in front of them. Eugene knew why the atmosphere was like this. Before they had even started traveling to Samar, he had heard the whole story from Ivatar. The air around Ivatar was also unusual. The muscles of his body were flexing hard enough to be seen with the naked eye, and his obvious display of rage and killing intent was making the space around him seem to vibrate. Of course I have to take action, Ivatar ground out. Climbing off his summoned steed, Ivatar steadily strode forwards. Ivatar Jahav, shouted a man loudly who was standing on top of the wall. Although he was slightly shorter than Ivatar, his especially rough-looking face made it seem like he could possibly be a crossbreed of a human and a gorilla. The man continued shouting, even if you are the next chieftain, your actions cannot be tolerated. What are you talking about? Ivatar calmly responded. This is a war that must be decided by the Zorans and our allies alone. However, you took advantage of the Patriarch's infirmity to act on your own volition, the man accused. Have you abandoned your pride as a Zoran? All this shouting was getting annoying. It had been Ivatar's personal decision to come to the Lionhearts looking for help. During that first battle in which both sides had retreated without being able to determine a victor or a loser, Ivatar's father, the chieftain of the Zoran tribe, had been mortally wounded and left on the brink of death. Ivatar had also participated in that first battle. They neither won nor lost, and no one managed to advance or retreat. At the very least, that's what Ivatar insisted, but the difference in strength could be felt right from the beginning. Coachillas still had enough slack to keep forces in reserve. They didn't use any of the demonic beasts they had received as support from Helmuth, nor did they mobilize any of their wicked shamans. However, the Zorans also had cards that they hadn't played yet. The battle had started all too quickly, so the gathering of their tribal alliance hadn't yet been fully finished. They also hadn't been able to perform their ceremonial prayer for victory to the god of the land. Just like how the Coachillas had yet to mobilize their shamans, the Zorans and their allied tribes were also keeping their shamans in reserve. The Zoran tribe's elders and Ivatar's relatives, all warriors with strong senses of pride, as well as the chieftains of the allied tribes, had all insisted that they still had a chance of seizing victory. However, Ivatar couldn't agree with their point of view. During that first battle against the Coachilla tribe, Ivatar had foreseen the eventual destruction of the Zoran tribe and the eradication of his fellow tribesmen. I received permission from my father, Ivatar spat out. He had been certain that the Zorons and their allied tribes would not be able to defeat the Coachillas alone. With faint hope, Ivatar had thought about getting help from Eugene, so after receiving the chieftain's permission he had left the forest. You dare speak of the chieftain? My brother has already passed away, while you, his own son, were gallivanting away from the tribe. After suffering from the agony of his injuries, he finally entered the land's embrace. When you weren't even here to take your place at my brother's deathbed. The man who revealed this tragedy was the same man who had first yelled at Ivatar. He was the late chieftain's brother as well as Ivatar's uncle. As his face contorted into a scowl, he accusingly pointed his finger at his nephew. You say that you got permission from brother? There is no way that my brother, who always prioritized the honor and pride of the tribe, would allow these people from the outside to enter our sacred battlefield. Eugene, who had been silently listening to all the shouting, suddenly spoke up. This is something that has been on my mind ever since the old days, but most bastards who spout on about things being sacred as a justification tend to be idiots. Are you talking about me? Christina opened her lidded eyes and stared piercingly at Eugene. In the face of that, Eugene could only avoid Christina's gaze and shut his mouth. Ivatar Jahov, the uncle continued. You must have taken advantage of the chieftain whose mind was clouded as he lay dying. What reason would I have to do something like that? Ivatar responded. The man scoffed. There's no need to know your reason for doing so. Just by trying to involve outsiders in our war, you have single-handedly abandoned the honor entrusted to you by the chieftain. The Coachillas are the ones who first drew in outsiders, Ivatar pointed out. The Coachillas are different than us. They may accept aid from Helmuth, but the Zoron tribe has always rejected any help from outside the forest, the uncle declared self-righteously. What if that leads us to lose the battle? Ivatar tried to argue. We will not be defeated, the uncle insisted. The arguments he was roaring were specious without a single trace of logic. Ivatar just shook his head with a vicious smile on his face. What do you want me to do? Ivatar demanded. Leave the Zoron tribe and never return, his uncle commanded. Did you really hate the fact you lost the position of the next chieftain to your own nephew that much? Ivatar asked mockingly. The uncle sneered. Do you really think that I am being blinded by such ambition? I am doing this for the honor and pride of our tribe. Naturally, Ivatar didn't believe those words. Eugene and the other people standing behind Ivatar didn't believe them either. Even the expressions of the warriors lined up on the walls shook with disbelief. However, Ivatar's uncle, as well as the alliance's chiefs, who were acting as representatives of their tribes, kept up their stern expressions. This sight caused Eugene to come up with a clear and despicable image of what was going on here. It seemed that they were just pretending to go to war, and they must have made a secret agreement to be sheltered underneath the umbrella of the Coachilla tribe once they admitted their defeat. However, Eugene didn't really care all that much about the power struggles between the natives living here. The uncle scoffed. And look at who you have behind you, Ivatar. Are those 7 people really all the reinforcements you've brought with you even after abandoning your place at your father's deathbed? There are only 3 men among them, and none of them seem to have the courageous demeanor of a warrior, one of the other tribal chiefs observed mockingly. Are those guys talking about us? Eugene asked himself as he glanced over at Cyan and Lovelian, who were standing at his side. He could understand why they would say so after looking at Lovelian, who was a wizard, and Cyan, who didn't seem all that strong based on his appearance. But me? Eugene muttered in disbelief. Did they really just say that he didn't seem to have the courageous demeanor of a warrior? And why on earth did you even bring 2 women with you? Were you hoping to offer them up in exchange for forgiving your filial impiety? Hey, why don't you become my wife? And the remaining 2 are children who aren't even old enough to be cut off from their mother's apron strings. The chieftains laughed as they pointed at Ivatar and Eugene's party mockingly. Melkith, who had just been standing there idly, let out a snort. Hey, about what those guys were just saying, I'm hoping that I just heard them wrong, but did one of those old guys up there really look at me and ask me to become his wife? Eugene placated her. They were probably saying that to Christina, not you, Lady Melkith. Melkith reacted defensively. What? Why would you think that? I think that they were definitely talking to me just now. After all, that old man is still looking at me right now. As long as they're normal, they would rather marry Christina than you, Lady Melkith, Eugene declared. Those words settled the irritation and anger that had been bubbling inside Christina's chest since earlier. Doesn't that mean Sir Eugene would also prefer me to be his wife? Christina thought giddily. Hamel isn't a normal person, but Christina, I think it's safe to take what he said just now as an actual proposal. Anise also excitedly encouraged. Melkith glared at Eugene with a blank expression. No way? Why? Both Saint Christina and I are plenty pretty, no? Eugene calmly responded. Because your age is 3 times that of Christina, Lady Melkith. Melkith's eyelashes fluttered in shock at this blunt reply. Yet even as they were having this leisurely conversation, the mockery coming from the top of the walls continued. Ivatar's face was contorted into a vicious scowl as he glared up at the city walls. Then after taking a deep breath, Ivatar spun around to face everyone. My apologies to all of you. Ivatar bowed his head deeply as he offered his apology. Although I did say that you might not receive a warm welcome, I never imagined that they would actually offer you such a lowly insult. Ivatar Jahav. How dare you, who claims to be the next chieftain, bow your head to someone else? A man shouted. Ivatar simply ignored these words and continued speaking. It seems that I was too short-sighted. I never imagined that warriors like them, who are also going on about their honor and pride, would actually show such ugly behavior. Since I don't dare to burden or offend you with this matter any longer, if you so desire, I can lead you back out of the forest immediately. Eugene waved off the offer. There's no need for that. Like I've already said, I also have something that I need to deal with in this forest. If that's the case, then please wait here for just a moment, Ivatar requested as he raised his bowed head. There was no need for him to ask for any help. While grinding his teeth in anger, Ivatar turned around. Although insults continued to pour down from the city walls, Ivatar had no intention of responding or even listening to them any longer. Without holding any weapons, he simply clenched his bare fists tightly and strode over to the walls. It happened in an instant. The ground below appeared to bounce Ivatar's feet upward like a spring. Having been sent flying, Ivatar rose to the top of the walls in a single leap. The Zoran tribe's deputy chieftain, Ivatar's uncle, wasn't alarmed by this. Since this was Ivatar they were dealing with, he naturally knew that Ivatar was capable of such actions. No, rather than being surprised, it had been his intention in the first place to provoke Ivatar into attacking in a rage, as he had also been planning to deal with Ivatar once and for all by killing him. Ivatar wasn't a warrior who merely relied on an overblown reputation. There were few warriors in the entire tribe who were as strong as he was. Ivatar's uncle raised the spear he had been hiding behind his back. The deputy chieftain then gave a mighty roar and threw the spear down at Ivatar. Wrapped in a tremendous amount of mana, the spear pierced through the air with a roar. Then ever so easily, the fiercely flying spear was caught in Ivatar's hand. Ivatar twisted his body in midair and threw the spear straight back. Spleered. Without even consuming any mana, the spear that was thrown using body strength alone pierced through the deputy chieftain. Boom. Then, without losing any of its power from penetrating into a human body, the spear proceeded to collapse the city walls. The other tribal chiefs who had been standing nearby let out roars. They leaped off the collapsing wall and threw themselves at the now falling Ivatar. It didn't take long for Ivatar to tear each of their arms off, one by one with his bare hands alone. Gah! The deputy chieftain, who was buried within the rubble of the collapsed wall, let out a cry as he was picked up by the spear that was still stuck in him. While shaking the spear that his uncle was impaled upon, Ivatar snarled, "You are no warrior." Ivatar hadn't spat out these words while expecting any sort of coherent response from the man. Ivatar slammed the raised spear down into the ground. Splat. When the body of the deputy chieftain was smashed into the ground, it exploded and his blood splattered in all directions. The other tribal chieftains, who had been reduced to being one-handed in mere moments, lacked the courage to order their warriors to kill Ivatar and could only clutch at their wounds. "Order the gates to be opened," Ivatar commanded without wiping away the blood that had spattered onto his face. The gates of the city soon swung open.